It was late, the kind of night where even the moon seems reluctant to show itself. Cold mist clung to the ground, creeping in like silent fingers curling around old stone path. Emma had always been cautious, especially when traveling alone through the Highlands. But that night, she felt something different, a presence that she couldn't explain. She stopped for a moment, catching her breath, the frost in the air biting at her lungs. As she exhaled, she noticed something shifting just beyond the light of her lantern. Something too large and too quiet to be an ordinary animal. A soft rustling in the brush drew her attention, and then, from the shadows, it stepped out. A cat. Or at least, it looked like a cat at first. But this was no house cat. It was enormous, easily the size of a large dog, with sleek, black fur that seemed to swallow the faint light around it. Its eyes, glowing a strangely otherworldly green, locked onto hers, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as the creature slowly padded toward her, each step purposeful, deliberate. There was a single, jagged streak of white across his chest, but it wasn't the fur that unnerved her the most. It was the intelligence in its gaze. The creature was watching her, even assessing her, like it knew something she didn't. As it came closer, she felt the air grow colder, her breath hitching as if the cat's very presence sucked the warmth from the world. And then, as quickly as it appeared, it turned and melted back into the mist, leaving Emma standing there, her heart racing, unable to shake the feeling that she had just seen something ancient, something far older than the land itself. Tonight's episode of Lunitar's Legend, Lore, and Lies, we dive into the shadows to reveal the truth behind this chilling creature. The topic of tonight's episode is the Cath Sith. The Cath Sith is not your ordinary feline. Known in Scottish and Irish folklore, this creature is a spectral black cat, far larger than any natural cat should be. Standing nearly the size of a large dog, its sleek, midnight black fur seems to absorb the light around it, creating almost unnatural darkness in its presence. The creature's most distinctive feature is the white patch of fur on its chest, a jagged, almost lightning-shaped streak, which stands out starkly against its otherwise inky coat. Its eyes, glowing an eerie green, seem to penetrate the very soul of those unfortunate enough to meet its gaze. The lore surrounding it is steeped in ancient Celtic belief, particularly in the Scottish Highlands where it is said to roam. Some legends claim the Cath Sith is a fairy in disguise, a creature that walks the line between the living world and the realm of the supernatural. Others believe it to be a witch transformed, able to shift in the form of a black cat 9 times before being trapped in the spectral shape forever. This is where the idea of the cat having 9 lives comes from. One of the most chilling aspects of its myth is it is associated with death. It is believed that the Cath Sith could steal a person's soul by passing over a corpse before burial, trapping the soul in limbo forever. To prevent this, ancient Highlanders held... Okay, we're going to try this one. Fiel Fadalak, or late wakes, where they would stay with the deceased, lighting fires and playing music to distract the creature and keep it away from the body. The Cath Sith is also said to have been linked to the Celtic festival of Samhain, a time when the veil between worlds was thinnest. On this night, it is believed that the Cath Sith would roam the countryside, seeking out offerings of milk left on doorsteps. If the offering pleased it, the Cath Sith would bless the household. If ignored, it would be the curse upon the home. Okay, and I know I pronounced that wrong. I was looking at the script and just said it. It's Samhain, not Samhain. Sorry about that to anybody who, caught it. But as soon as I said it, I realized it. But as I told you, I try to leave in my errors and that way. You know it's real. So, but the bullet point, it fooled me on that one. This creature doesn't reside in any ordinary place. It is said to wander the most desolate areas of the Highlands, lurking near ancient burial sites, crumbling castles, and forgotten cairns. In the deep shadows of these ancient places, it waits, watching, always with the unsettling intelligence burning in its eyes. Emma's encounter was just the beginning. Throughout the centuries, the Cath Sith has been cited by many, and each story is as chilling as the last. Let's start with Fergus, a Highland farmer from the early 1900s. Fergus, he was a pragmatic man, not one that believed in fanciful tales or superstitions, but even he couldn't explain what happened one late autumn evening. He had been out in the fields, checking on his sheep as the light faded. The mist had rolled in thick that night, turning the rolling hills into a sea of fog. As he walked through his flock, counting the heads, he noticed something strange, an unusual shape moving among the sheep. At first, he thought it was a stray dog, perhaps a wild one, maybe even a wolf, though they were rare in those days. But as he drew closer, his heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a dog. Standing between the sheep was a cat larger than any he'd ever seen. Its fur was as black as pitch, and its glowing green eyes reflected back at him like fire in the darkness. The sheep, usually skittish, stood frozen, seemingly transfixed by this creature's presence. Fergus's first instinct was to shout, to scare it off, but something stopped him. A cold chill ran down his spine, and he felt his limbs grow heavy, as though the air around him had thickened, weighed down by an unseen force. The cat, it didn't move, didn't even twitch a whisker. It simply watched him, those luminous eyes unblinking. Time seemed to stretch on, an unbearable silence hanging between them. Finally, as if it was satisfied, the cat turned and slowly padded into the fog, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. The next morning, Fergus found one of his sheep dead. No signs of an attack, no wounds, no blood. It was just simply dead. Its eyes, they were wide open, and they were glazed with fear, staring up at the sky. Fergus, well, he never spoke of that night again, but the memory haunted him until his final days. Then, there's the tale of Anwen, a young woman from the 1800s who had a close brush with the Cath Sith while traveling through the Highlands. She was a wanderer, known for her adventurous spirit. One summer evening, she decided to rest near an ancient stone circle, the kind that dot the Highlands with their mysterious presence. She'd always been drawn to such places, curious about the ancient powers they might hold. As dusk settled in, the shadows lengthened. She noticed a figure on the edge of the clearing. Sitting just outside the circle, partially obscured by the tall grass, was a large black cat. At first, she thought it must belong to a nearby farmer or traveler, but as she looked closer, a wave of unease washed over her. The cat was a little too large to be a house pet, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, a cold, almost malevolent gleam. And also, the cat didn't move. It didn't blink, just simply watched her as if waiting. And when felt, her heart began to race, her instincts telling her to leave. She stood, gathering her belongings, and she moved. The cat rose as well, didn't make a sound, but she could still feel its presence, pacing her as she left the circle. She quickened her pace, but every time she glanced back, the cat was there, keeping a steady distance, its green eyes never leaving her. By the time she reached the road, the cat was gone, but the feeling of being watched lingered long after. Anwen never returned to that stone circle, and from then on she made sure to avoid any place where the Cath Sith might be waiting. Perhaps one of the most unsettling stories comes from Seamus, a gravedigger from a small Highland village in the mid-1800s. Seamus had grown... I'm guessing I'm pronouncing that wrong. I'm betting you that's Seamus. But we'll go with Seamus, okay? Seamus had grown accustomed to working late in the night, preparing graves in the village cemetery. But nothing could have prepared him for what witnessed one cold winter evening. It was a quiet night, the sky heavy with the promise of snow. Seamus had been working on a fresh grave, the last for the night, when he noticed something unusual in the distance. A dark shape, larger than any cat he'd ever seen, was sitting near the edge of the graveyard, just outside the reach of his lantern's light. Its green eyes, it reflected that weak light, though, glowing like embers in the darkness. Seamus paused, his shovel in midair, staring at the creature. He'd heard stories of the Cath Sith, the soul stealer, and a cold dread crept over him. He worked faster, digging furiously, but every time he glanced up, that cat was still there, watching and unmoving. As he finished the grave, the creature began to approach. Slowly, deliberately, it padded toward him, its gaze never leaving his. Seamus's hand shook as he covered the grave with earth, muttering prayers under his breath. The cat stopped at the edge of the grave, sitting as if still as a statue, its green eyes burning into him. Suddenly, Seamus heard a low, guttural growl, a sound that seemed to come from the very earth beneath him. The cat's fur bristled, and for a moment it seemed as though the shadows themselves were shifting, moving closer to him. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. The growling continued, a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated through the air. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the Cath Sith was gone. It vanished in the night, leaving Seamus standing there alone in the graveyard, trembling and drenched in cold sweat. The next morning, when he returned to check the grave, he found strange claw marks scratched into the coffin lid, as if something had tried to get inside. There's also the story of Margaret, a midwife who lived in the Highlands during the late 1800s. One night, after assisting with a difficult birth in a remote village, she had set off on her journey back home, traveling through the thick, dense forest that separated the villages. The night was dark, and the trees closed in around her, casting long, ominous shadows across her path. As she reached a clearing, she heard it, a low, almost imperceptible purring sound. It was rhythmic, like the sound of a large cat breathing. She stopped, her eyes scanning the darkness, and that's when she saw it. Just on the edge of her lantern's light, the creature was enormous, with fur so black it seemed to blend into the very night. Its eyes glowed like two burning coals, fixating on her with a malevolent intensity. Margaret's heart raced, but she was a woman of reason. She stood her ground, thinking perhaps the cat would lose interest. But the Cath Sith had other plans. Slowly it began to circle her, its purring growing louder, almost vibrating through the ground beneath her. The closer it came, the more she felt as if something was being pulled from her, a strange, creeping sensation, as if her very soul was being tugged at by unseen hands. Just when she thought she could bear it no more, the cat stopped, locking eyes with her one last time before turning and disappearing into the darkness. Margaret hurried home, but for the rest of her days she swore that night had changed her, that a piece of her had been left behind in that clearing. Each of these encounters paint a vivid, terrifying picture of the Cath Sith, a creature not bound by the natural world, but one that exists on the fringes of reality, slipping between shadow and light, always watching, always waiting. The Cath Sith is a creature of legend, but to those who have encountered it, there is no doubt of its existence. A being that straddles the line between natural and supernatural, it embodies the mysterious and haunting spirit of the Highlands themselves, whether it's a guardian of the dead, a witch trapped in a spectral form, or a fairy's dark companion. One thing is clear, when the Cath Sith crosses your path, it is more than just a fleeting shadow. Thank you for joining me tonight on Lunitar's Legends, Lore, and Lies. If you enjoyed this episode, want to hear more about the eerie, the unexplained, and the supernatural, make sure to follow us and leave a review. Also, if you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment below. I'd like to hear from you. Till next time, keep your eyes open for what lurks in the dark, and remember, some legends are far more than just stories.